Maria wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carefully mixed another batch of mortar. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small village of Al-Rashid, but she had grown accustomed to working in harsh conditions. For 3 months now, she had been part of an international aid organization helping rebuild homes destroyed by years of conflict. The wall she was repairing belonged to a school that had been damaged in the crossfire between opposing forces. The 28-year-old engineer from Spain had volunteered for this mission after losing her younger brother in a terrorist attack in Madrid. She felt compelled to do something meaningful, something that would help heal the wounds left by senseless violence. Her supervisor had warned her about the dangers of working in this region, but Maria was determined to make a difference. As she spread the mortar carefully between the concrete blocks, Maria reflected on how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been designing luxury apartments in Barcelona, living a comfortable but somewhat empty existence. Now, surrounded by the sounds of children playing in the distance and the occasional call to prayer from the nearby mosque, she felt more purpose than she had ever experienced. The other volunteers had initially questioned her decision to work alone on this particular wall. It faced the main road where military convoys frequently passed, making it a potentially dangerous location. But Maria had insisted. The wall was crucial for the school's security, and she had the technical expertise needed to ensure it was built properly. She had studied the original blueprints and noticed that previous repair attempts had failed because they hadn't addressed the foundation issues. Her hands moved methodically as she placed each block, checking the level repeatedly. Precision was everything in construction, and she took pride in her work. The children from the school would often gather to watch her, their curious eyes following her every movement. They would chatter excitedly in Arabic, and though she didn't understand their words, their smiles were universal. Ahmed, the school's elderly caretaker, would bring her tea each afternoon. Through broken English and hand gestures, he had told her about his grandchildren who attended the school. He spoke of his dreams for their future, hoping they would grow up in a world free from the violence that had shaped his own life. Maria found these moments of human connection deeply moving. The work was physically demanding, but Maria had always been strong. Her father, a construction foreman, had taught her the trade during summer breaks from university. He had been skeptical when she chose engineering over following directly in his footsteps, but he had given her the practical skills that now served her well. She could feel his presence with her as she worked, remembering his lessons about the importance of solid foundations and attention to detail. As the days passed, Maria noticed the subtle rhythms of life in the village. The morning call to prayer would wake her before dawn, followed by the sounds of people beginning their daily routines. Children would walk to school, their laughter echoing through the narrow streets. Merchants would set up their stalls, and the aroma of fresh bread would fill the air. Despite the ongoing conflict in the region, life continued with a resilience that amazed her. The security situation had been relatively calm recently, but everyone remained vigilant. The aid organization had established protocols for various threat levels, and Maria carried a radio that kept her connected to the security team. She had undergone basic safety training before deployment, learning to recognize potential dangers and emergency procedures. Her fellow volunteers came from different countries and backgrounds. There was James, a retired teacher from Canada who was helping establish a library. Sophie, a French nurse running a mobile clinic, and Hassan, a Syrian refugee who served as their translator and cultural liaison. They had become like family, supporting each other through the challenges of working in a conflict zone. The evenings were Maria's favorite time. After the intense heat of the day subsided, the volunteers would gather on the rooftop of their compound to share meals and stories. They would discuss their progress, share concerns about security, and dream about the impact their work might have on the community. Sometimes local residents would join them, creating a bridge between cultures that transcended language barriers. Maria had been keeping a journal since arriving in Al-Rashid. She wrote about her experiences, the people she met, and her evolving understanding of the complex situation in the region. Her entries revealed a growing appreciation for the strength and dignity of the local population, who continued to build their lives despite ongoing uncertainty. The wall was nearly half complete when Maria first noticed the increased military activity in the area. More convoys were passing by and helicopters flew overhead more frequently. The local security coordinator had briefed the volunteers about heightened tensions in neighboring regions, advising extra caution while continuing their work. Despite these concerns, Maria remained focused on her task. The wall represented more than just a barrier. It was a symbol of hope and resilience. Each block she placed was a small act of defiance against those who sought to destroy rather than build. She thought about the children who would be protected by this wall, the lessons they would learn in the classrooms beyond it, and the future they might create. One morning, as Maria prepared her tools for another day of work, Ahmed approached her with unusual urgency in his manner. He spoke rapidly in Arabic, gesturing toward the main road. Hassan quickly translated. Intelligence suggested that militant groups were planning activities in the area. The security team was reassessing the situation, but for now, work could continue with extra precautions. Maria acknowledged the warning but felt a strong determination to continue. The wall was at a critical stage of construction, and stopping now could compromise the structural integrity of the work already completed. She had come too far to abandon the project when it was so close to completion. The children of Al-Rashid deserved a safe place to learn, and she was going to ensure they got it. As she began mixing the mortar for another section of the wall, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this day would be different from the others. The air seemed charged with tension, and even the usual sounds of the village appeared muted. But she pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on the familiar rhythm of her work and the satisfaction that came from creating something lasting and meaningful in a world that had seen too much destruction. The morning had started like any other, with Maria arriving at the construction site before the heat became unbearable. She had made significant progress on the wall over the past few days, and today she planned to complete another crucial section. The concrete blocks were stacked neatly beside her, and she had calculated exactly how much mortar would be needed to finish this portion of the project. As she worked, Maria became aware of an unusual amount of activity on the main road. Military vehicles were passing more frequently than normal, and she could hear the distant sound of helicopters. The radio on her belt crackled occasionally with routine check-ins from the security team, but nothing seemed immediately alarming. Around mid-morning, Hassan appeared at the construction site with a concerned expression. He explained that the local authorities had received intelligence about possible militant activity in the region. While there was no immediate threat to the village, everyone was advised to remain alert. Maria nodded, acknowledging the warning, while continuing her methodical work on the wall. The children from the school were noticeably absent from their usual spots watching her work. Their teacher had apparently decided to keep them inside as a precautionary measure. Maria missed their cheerful presence, but she understood the need for caution. The silence felt strange after becoming accustomed to their animated chatter and laughter. Despite the tension in the air, Maria found solace in the familiar routine of her work. Each block placed correctly, each joint properly mortared, brought her closer to completing this section of the wall. She had developed a rhythm over the months, and her hands moved with practiced efficiency. The physical labor helped calm her nerves and keep her focused on the task at hand. Around noon, as Maria was taking a brief water break, she heard the rumble of heavy vehicles approaching. A convoy of military trucks was slowing down as it passed the school. This wasn't unusual, as convoys often adjusted their speed in populated areas. But something about this particular convoy caught her attention. The vehicles appeared more heavily armored than typical, and the soldiers looked especially alert. As the convoy passed, Maria noticed one of the rear vehicles had stopped completely. Several soldiers had dismounted and were surveying the area carefully. She could see them speaking into their radios and pointing in different directions. Their movements were deliberate and professional, suggesting they were responding to specific intelligence rather than conducting a routine patrol. One of the soldiers, distinguished by his different uniform and equipment, approached the school compound. Maria could see that he wasn't a regular infantry soldier. His gear was more specialized, and his demeanor suggested extensive training and experience. He moved, with the confident precision of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. The soldier gestured to his teammates and then approached the area where Maria was working. She instinctively straightened up, unsure of what was happening. The man's face was serious but not unfriendly. He spoke briefly into his radio before walking directly toward her position by the wall. Hassan quickly appeared from the school building, ready to translate if necessary, but the soldier spoke in accented but clear English. He introduced himself simply as Sergeant Rodriguez and explained that his unit had received intelligence about potential hostile activity in the immediate area. They needed to establish a temporary observation position, and the partially completed wall offered the best vantage point for monitoring the surrounding roads. Maria felt her heart rate increase as the reality of the situation became clear. The relative safety she had felt while working on the wall was suddenly replaced by the stark awareness that danger might be approaching. Sergeant Rodriguez was calm and professional, but the urgency in his voice was unmistakable. The soldier explained that his team needed to set up their equipment quickly and quietly. They would be using the area around the wall as a tactical position, which meant Maria would need to stop her construction work temporarily. He assured her that they would try to minimize disruption to the project, but security had to take priority. Sergeant Rodriguez spoke. Maria could see other members of his unit moving into position around the school compound. They worked with impressive efficiency, setting up what appeared to be observation equipment and communication devices. Their movements were coordinated and silent, suggesting extensive training in these types of operations. Maria found herself fascinated by the professionalism of these soldiers. They were clearly elite troops, possibly special forces based on their equipment and tactics. Sergeant Rodriguez remained near her position, periodically checking in with his team through his radio headset. His presence was reassuring despite the circumstances. The other aid workers had been quietly moved to a secure location within the school building. Maria could see Sophie and James through one of the windows, their faces showing concern but not panic. The security protocols they had trained for were being implemented smoothly, which helped maintain calm despite the uncertain situation. Hassan stayed close to Maria, ready to facilitate communication if needed. He had lived through many such situations and seemed to understand the gravity of the moment while maintaining his composure. His familiarity with these types of security incidents was both comforting and sobering for Maria. Sergeant Rodriguez periodically updated Maria on the situation. Intelligence suggested that a hostile group might be planning to move through the area, possibly targeting the military convoy or the international aid workers. His unit was tasked with gathering information and providing early warning if threats materialized. The wall Maria had been building happened to provide an ideal observation position for monitoring the main approaches to the village. As the afternoon progressed, Maria found herself in the surreal position of watching highly trained soldiers use her construction project as part of their military operation. The wall she had built with hopes of protecting school children was now serving as a shield for soldiers protecting the entire community. The irony wasn't lost on her. The soldiers maintained their vigilant watch throughout the afternoon. Sergeant Rodriguez continued to provide updates, explaining that his team was coordinating with other military units in the region to track potential threats. The intelligence picture was developing, but it wasn't yet clear whether the suspected hostile group would actually move through their area. Despite the tension, Maria couldn't help but admire the skill and dedication of these soldiers. They had appeared seemingly from nowhere, quickly established an effective defensive position, and were now standing between the village and potential danger. Their commitment to protecting civilians, even foreign aid workers, was evident in every action they took. As evening approached, Sergeant Rodriguez received what appeared to be significant information through his radio. His expression became more serious, and he began issuing quiet instructions to his team. Something was definitely developing, and the waiting period was coming to an end. The intensity of the situation escalated rapidly, as Sergeant Rodriguez received increasingly frequent radio communications. Maria could sense the change in the soldiers' demeanor, even though she couldn't understand their tactical language. Their Movements became more purposeful, and additional equipment was quickly deployed around the wall she had been constructing. Through Hassan's translations and Sergeant Rodriguez's occasional explanations, Maria learned that intelligence had confirmed the movement of a hostile group toward their location. The militants were believed to be heavily armed and had previously targeted both military convoys and international aid workers. The sergeant's unit was now transitioning from a surveillance role to active defense preparation. Maria watched in fascination as the soldiers transformed her construction site into a tactical position. They had positioned their weapons to provide overlapping fields of fire, established communication lines, and created clear escape routes. The wall she had built was now serving as cover for defensive positions, its solid construction providing the protection needed for the soldiers to effectively do their job. Sergeant Rodriguez approached Maria with a serious expression. He explained that while his team could handle most situations, the intelligence suggested this particular group was larger and better equipped than usual. They might need additional support, and every person who could contribute to the defense of the village would be valuable. He paused before asking if Maria had any experience with firearms. Maria's mind raced back to her childhood in rural Spain. Her grandfather had been a hunter and had taught her to shoot during summer visits to his farm. She had been quite skilled with rifles and had even won some local shooting competitions as a teenager. However, that seemed like a lifetime ago, and she hadn't touched a weapon in years. She honestly explained her limited but genuine experience to the sergeant. The professional soldier nodded thoughtfully. He mentioned that his unit carried backup weapons, and in extreme circumstances, they might need assistance from anyone with shooting skills. He wasn't asking her to become a combatant, but rather to be prepared to help defend herself and others if the situation deteriorated beyond their control. The conversation was both sobering and strangely empowering. As darkness began to fall, the village became unusually quiet. The normal evening sounds of daily life were replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to amplify every small noise. Street lights were dimmed on instruction from the military, creating a landscape of shadows that could conceal both defenders and potential threats. Maria found herself positioned behind the wall she had built, now serving as a crucial piece of defensive infrastructure. The irony wasn't lost on her that the barrier intended to protect school children might now be protecting everyone in the village. Sergeant Rodriguez had positioned himself nearby, his advanced equipment allowing him to monitor approaches to their location. The waiting was perhaps the most difficult part. Maria's engineering mind wanted to understand the tactical situation, to analyze the defensive positions and calculate fields of fire just as she would approach any technical problem. But this wasn't a construction project with predictable materials and known outcomes. This was a fluid situation where human lives hung in the balance. Through his night vision equipment, Sergeant Rodriguez began detecting movement on the roads leading to the village. He communicated quietly with his team and, with higher command, providing updates on what appeared to be the approach of several vehicles. The hostile group was moving exactly as intelligence had predicted, but they were larger in number than initially estimated. Maria could feel her heart racing as the reality of potential combat became increasingly likely. She thought about her family in Spain, her colleagues from the aid organization, and the children who attended the school behind the wall. All of them were depending on the skill and dedication of this small group of soldiers to keep them safe. Sergeant Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. He approached Maria with a backup rifle and began explaining its basic operation. While he hoped it wouldn't be necessary, he wanted her prepared to defend herself if the defensive perimeter was breached. His instructions were clear and professional, focusing on safety procedures and basic marksmanship principles. The weapon felt heavier than Maria remembered from her youth, but the fundamentals came back quickly. Sergeant Rodriguez was impressed by her natural handling of the rifle and her obvious familiarity with basic firearms safety. He positioned her where she could provide support if needed while remaining as protected as possible behind the solid wall she had constructed. As the night deepened, the tension became almost unbearable. Radio chatter increased as other military units in the region coordinated their response to the developing situation. The hostile group was now confirmed to be moving directly toward the village, and engagement seemed inevitable. Maria found herself thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. She had come to this village seeking to build something positive, to contribute to peace and reconstruction. Now she was potentially preparing to defend that same community with a weapon in her hands. The transformation from builder to defender felt both natural and surreal. Sergeant Rodriguez continued to provide updates as his team tracked the approaching threat. The militants were using multiple vehicles and appeared to have heavy weapons of their own. His unit was outnumbered but had the advantages of prepared positions, superior training, and knowledge of the terrain. Still, the coming engagement would test everyone involved. The school building behind them remained dark and quiet, its occupants hopefully unaware of the drama unfolding outside their walls. Maria thought about Ahmed, the elderly caretaker who had brought her tea each afternoon, and hoped he was safely sheltered with his family. The human connections she had made in the village gave personal meaning to the abstract concept of defense. As midnight approached, Sergeant Rodriguez received confirmation that the hostile group had stopped approximately 2 kilometers from the village. They appeared to be conducting their own reconnaissance, probably trying to determine the strength of any defensive positions. This pause gave the defenders additional time to prepare, but it also increased the psychological pressure of waiting. Maria adjusted her position behind the wall, checking her sight lines and ensuring she understood the safety procedures Sergeant Rodriguez had explained. She hoped desperately that she wouldn't need to use the weapon, but she was determined to be ready if circumstances demanded it. The lives of too many innocent people depended on everyone doing their part. The sergeant moved closer to Maria's position, his professional demeanor unchanged despite the mounting pressure. He explained that contact was likely within the next hour, and he wanted to ensure she understood her role. She was not expected to engage in offensive operations but should be prepared to defend her position if the perimeter was breached. His confidence in her abilities was both reassuring and daunting. The first shots came just after midnight, echoing through the village like thunder breaking the oppressive silence. Maria felt her entire body tense as the reality of combat finally arrived. Sergeant Rodriguez immediately began coordinating his team's response through his radio headset while maintaining his position behind the wall she had constructed. The engagement began at the edge of the village, where the sergeant's forward observers had positioned themselves to provide early warning. The hostile group had attempted to approach under cover of darkness, but the soldiers' advanced equipment had detected their movement. What followed was a carefully coordinated defensive action designed to protect the civilian population while neutralizing the threat. Maria could see muzzle flashes in the distance, brief points of light that marked the exchange of gunfire between the soldiers and the militants. The sound was different from what she had expected, less dramatic than movies had suggested but more immediate and frightening. Each shot represented someone's life, potentially hanging in the balance. Sergeant Rodriguez moved with practiced efficiency, coordinating with his team while maintaining awareness of Maria's position. He had positioned her where she would be protected by the wall's solid construction, while still being able to observe the surrounding area. His tactical expertise was evident in every decision, from equipment placement to communication protocols. Battle seemed to ebb and flow as both sides maneuvered for advantage. The militants had superior numbers, but the soldiers had better training, equipment, and defensive positions. The wall Maria had built was proving crucial in providing cover for the defenders, its concrete construction stopping incoming rounds that might otherwise have found their targets. Through his radio communications, Sergeant Rodriguez learned that the hostile group was attempting to flank their position by moving through the narrow streets of the village. This development changed the tactical situation significantly, as it meant civilians might be caught in crossfire. The sergeant had to balance offensive effectiveness with the paramount need to protect innocent lives. Maria watched as the soldiers adapted their strategy in real time. They repositioned some of their equipment and adjusted their fields of fire to account for the changing threat. Their professionalism under pressure was remarkable, with each team member knowing exactly what to do without needing detailed instructions. The intensity of the engagement increased as the militants moved closer to the school compound. Maria could now hear individual voices shouting in Arabic, though she couldn't understand their words. The proximity of the threat made everything more personal and immediate. These weren't distant enemies anymore. They were people who posed a direct danger to everyone she had come to care about in the village. Sergeant Rodriguez made a tactical decision that demonstrated both his skill and his trust in Maria's abilities. As his team repositioned to counter the flanking movement, he assigned Maria to maintain observation of one approach route while he coordinated the broader defensive response. It was a significant responsibility that acknowledged her competence while keeping her as safe as possible. With the rifle in her hands and specific instructions about her sector of responsibility, Maria felt the weight of the moment. She understood that Sergeant Rodriguez needed every available person to help protect the village, and her shooting skills, rusty though they might be, could make a difference. The transition from aid worker to defender felt both natural and profound. The fighting continued for what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes. Modern combat, Maria was learning, was characterized by intense bursts of activity followed by periods of careful maneuvering and position adjustment. The soldiers communicated constantly, sharing information about enemy movements and coordinating their response. Through her assigned observation sector, Maria spotted movement that didn't match the patterns she had been watching. Several figures were approaching through the shadows, moving carefully but steadily toward a position that would give them a clear shot at Sergeant Rodriguez and his team. She faced her first real decision about whether to engage. Following the procedures the sergeant had explained, Maria used the radio to report what she was seeing, rather than immediately opening fire. This allowed Sergeant Rodriguez to assess the situation and make the tactical decision about how to respond. His calm acknowledgement of her report demonstrated the trust and communication that had developed between them. The sergeant confirmed that Maria was observing a genuine threat that his team hadn't yet detected. The militants were indeed attempting to establish a position that would compromise the defenders' ability to protect the school and its occupants. This was exactly the kind of situation where Maria's additional eyes and defensive capability could make the crucial difference. Sergeant Rodriguez gave Maria clear, specific instructions about engaging the threat. She was to wait for his signal, then provide covering fire while his team maneuvered to a better position. The plan was designed to neutralize the immediate danger, while minimizing Maria's exposure to return fire. His tactical expertise was evident in every detail of the coordination. When the signal came, Maria found that her grandfather's training returned with surprising clarity. The rifle felt familiar in her hands, despite the years that had passed since she had last fired a weapon. Her first shots were carefully aimed and effective, providing the covering fire that allowed Sergeant Rodriguez's team to reposition successfully. The engagement at close quarters was brief but intense. Maria's contribution, though limited, proved crucial in allowing the professional soldiers to outmaneuver the militants who had been attempting to flank their position. The combination of her observation skills and defensive fire had helped prevent what could have been a catastrophic breakthrough. As the immediate threat was neutralized, Maria felt a complex mixture of emotions. She had successfully defended herself and others, but the reality of having been in combat was sobering. Sergeant Rodriguez's quick check on her condition and professional acknowledgement of her contribution helped her process what had just occurred. The larger engagement continued around the village perimeter, but the immediate threat to the school compound had been eliminated. Maria maintained her observation position while Sergeant Rodriguez coordinated with his team to support other defensive positions. The wall she had built continued to provide crucial protection for everyone involved. Through the radio chatter, it became clear that the tide of the battle was turning in favor of the defenders. The militants had apparently underestimated both the military presence in the village and the effectiveness of the defensive positions. Several of their number had been captured or neutralized, and the remainder were withdrawing from the area. As dawn began to break over the village, the shooting gradually stopped. Sergeant Rodriguez received confirmation that the hostile group had been successfully repelled and was no longer threatening the community. The immediate danger had passed, but the impact of the night's events would be felt for much longer. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, Maria sat quietly behind the wall she had built, the rifle still in her hands but no longer needed. The contrast between the peaceful sunrise and the violence that had just ended seemed surreal. The village was slowly coming back to life, with cautious voices and the distant sound of people checking on their neighbors and loved ones. Sergeant Rodriguez approached her position, his expression showing both professional satisfaction and genuine concern for her well-being. The engagement had been successfully concluded, but he understood that for Maria, this had been her first experience of combat. His years of military service had taught him that processing such events required time and often conversation with someone who understood. The sergeant took a seat beside Maria on the ground, his own weapon now secured but within reach. For a few minutes, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the village gradually return to normal activity. Children's voices could be heard in the distance, a sound that brought profound relief after the night's violence. The normalcy of daily life resuming was perhaps the best evidence that they had succeeded in protecting what mattered most. Maria found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed in the span of just a few hours. She had awakened that morning as an aid worker focused on reconstruction and peaceful development. Now she was someone who had actively participated in defending a community under attack. The transformation felt both significant and strangely natural, as if circumstances had revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. Sergeant Rodriguez began debriefing Maria about the night's events, not in a formal military sense, but as one person helping another process a traumatic but meaningful experience. He explained how her observations and defensive actions had contributed to the successful defense of the village. Her ability to remain calm under pressure and follow tactical instructions had impressed him and his team. The professional soldier shared his own perspective on the experience of combat, explaining that feeling conflicted about having been involved in violence was normal and healthy. He emphasized that Maria's actions had been purely defensive, aimed at protecting innocent people rather than causing harm for its own sake. This distinction was important for processing the moral complexity of what had occurred. As they talked, other members of the aid organization began emerging from the school building, where they had sheltered during the engagement. Sophie, the French nurse, immediately approached to check on Maria's physical and emotional condition. James, the Canadian teacher, expressed amazement at Maria's transformation from construction worker to defender, while Hassan provided cultural context for the night's events. The village residents also began appearing, initially cautious but gradually more confident as they realized the danger had passed. Ahmed, the elderly school caretaker, approached Maria with tears in his eyes. Through Hassan's translation, he expressed profound gratitude for her role in protecting the school, and by extension all the children who would return to classes in the coming days. The wall that Maria had been constructing had sustained some damage during the engagement, with bullet marks and small holes visible in several places. Ironically, the damage seemed to give the structure more character rather than diminishing its value. Sergeant Rodriguez pointed out that the wall's solid construction had likely saved several lives by providing effective cover during the most intense moments of the fighting. Local authorities arrived as the morning progressed, including military officials who needed to document the incident and ensure that no remaining threats existed in the area. Maria found herself being interviewed about her observations and actions, her account contributing to the official record of events. The attention felt strange after months of working quietly on construction projects. The media also learned of the engagement, and reporters began arriving to cover the story of international aid workers being caught up in combat operations. Maria was reluctant to speak to journalists, preferring to focus on processing her own experience rather than explaining it to others. Sergeant Rodriguez helped shield her from unwanted attention while respecting her right to tell her own story if she chose. As the day progressed, Maria realized that her relationship with the village and its people had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just a foreign volunteer helping with reconstruction. She was someone who had stood with the community in its moment of greatest danger. The bonds formed through shared risk and mutual protection were deeper than those created through humanitarian work alone. The aid organization's leadership arrived to assess the situation and determine how to proceed with their mission in light of recent events. There were discussions about security protocols, risk assessment, and whether international volunteers should continue working in areas where such incidents might occur. Maria found herself advocating strongly for continuing the mission, arguing that the community needed their support more than ever. Sergeant Rodriguez informed Maria that his unit would be remaining in the area for several more days to ensure that no follow-up attacks were planned. The intelligence picture suggested that the previous night's engagement had disrupted the militant group's operations significantly, but vigilance would continue to be necessary. His professional assessment was that Maria and her colleagues should be safe to resume their work. The decision about whether to continue her mission was ultimately Maria's to make. Her supervisor made it clear that no one would question her choice if she decided to return to Spain after such a traumatic experience. The organization would support whatever decision she made, understanding that being involved in combat was far beyond what anyone had signed up for when volunteering for humanitarian work. Maria spent the afternoon walking through the village, observing the damage from the engagement and talking with residents about their experiences. The resilience of the community was remarkable, with people already beginning to clean up and repair the minor damage to their homes and businesses. Their determination to continue normal life despite the threat of violence was both inspiring and humbling. Children began returning to the streets as their parents became confident that the danger had passed. Several of them approached Maria shyly, having heard stories about her involvement in the night's events. Through gestures and the few Arabic words she had learned, they expressed curiosity about her experience and gratitude for her protection of their school. As evening approached, Maria made her decision about the future. The events of the previous night had clarified her understanding of why her work mattered and strengthened her commitment to the people of Al-Rashid. She would stay and complete the wall, not just as a construction project, but as a symbol of the community's determination to build a better future despite the challenges they faced. Sergeant Rodriguez was not surprised by Maria's decision to remain. In his experience, people who discovered they had the courage to stand up for others in dangerous situations often found it difficult to walk away when the work was unfinished. He respected her choice while emphasizing the continued importance of security awareness and cooperation with military personnel in the area. 3 weeks after the engagement, Maria stood back to admire the completed wall. The structure was stronger than she had originally planned, reinforced with additional steel and concrete after the night's events had demonstrated its crucial importance. The bullet marks from the engagement had been carefully filled and smoothed, but she had chosen to leave subtle evidence of what had occurred as a reminder of the wall's unique history. The completion ceremony was attended by the entire village community, along with Sergeant Rodriguez and several members of his unit who had remained in the area to ensure continued security. Local officials, religious leaders, and representatives from the aid organization all gathered to commemorate not just the construction project, but the spirit of cooperation and mutual defense that had made it possible. Ahmed, the school's caretaker, had insisted on organizing a traditional celebration to mark the occasion. Tables were set up in the school courtyard, filled with local delicacies prepared by families throughout the village. The atmosphere was festive but also deeply meaningful, acknowledging both the joy of completion and the sacrifices that had been made to reach this point. Maria found herself reflecting on how much she had changed during her time in Al-Rashid. The woman who had arrived months ago seeking to rebuild walls and find personal meaning had discovered capabilities and strength she hadn't known she possessed. The experience of standing with the community during its moment of greatest danger had transformed her understanding of what it meant to serve others. The children from the school had prepared a special presentation for Maria, with drawings and letters expressing their gratitude for her work on the wall and her protection of their school. Their innocent artwork depicting the wall as a symbol of safety and hope brought tears to her eyes. These children represented the future that everyone had fought to protect that dangerous night. Sergeant Rodriguez approached Maria during the celebration, carrying a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. He explained that his unit had collected signatures and messages from everyone who had participated in the defense of the village, creating an informal record of the events and their appreciation for Maria's contribution. The gesture was deeply meaningful, representing acceptance into a brotherhood she had never expected to join. Inside the package was a small piece of metal that had been recovered from the wall after the engagement. It was a bullet fragment that had embedded itself in the concrete she had mixed with her own hands. Sergeant Rodriguez had had it mounted as a reminder of how her work as a builder had literally saved lives by providing protection when it was most needed. The sergeant also presented Maria with a military unit coin, a tradition among elite forces to recognize exceptional service or significant shared experiences. He explained that while she had never enlisted in the military, her actions during the engagement had earned her the respect and recognition of professional soldiers. The weight of the coin in her hand represented bonds forged through shared danger and mutual trust. Local television crews had arrived to document the wall's completion and the story of the international aid worker who had helped defend the village. Maria was initially reluctant to be interviewed, but Hassan convinced her that sharing her experience could inspire others to volunteer for humanitarian missions. Her story had the potential to show that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences when circumstances demanded courage. During the interview, Maria spoke carefully about the events, emphasizing the professionalism of the soldiers she had worked with and the resilience of the village community. She avoided dwelling on the violence itself, instead focusing on the positive outcomes and the importance of supporting communities working to rebuild after conflict. Her message was one of hope, rather than heroism. The completed wall stood as more than just a barrier protecting the school. It had become a symbol of international cooperation and the willingness of ordinary people to stand together against those who would destroy rather than build. Students had begun incorporating the wall story into their lessons about courage, community, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Maria's time in Al-Rashid was drawing to a close, but her connection to the community would endure long after her departure. She had helped establish a training program that would teach local residents advanced construction techniques, ensuring that future repairs and improvements could be completed without outside assistance. The knowledge transfer was as important as the physical construction she had completed. Sergeant Rodriguez and his unit were also preparing to leave the area, their mission successfully completed. The intelligence networks that had been disrupted during the engagement had not reformed, and the region was experiencing its most stable period in years. The professional relationship between Maria and the sergeant had evolved into genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience. On her final morning in the village, Maria arrived early at the wall to spend a few quiet moments reflecting on everything that had happened. The surface she had worked on for months was now smooth and complete, marked only by the subtle scars that told the story of its unique role in protecting the community. The morning sun cast long shadows that emphasized the structure's solid presence. Children from the school began arriving for classes, their laughter and chatter filling the air as they passed through the gate protected by Maria's wall. Several of them stopped to wave at her, their easy familiarity a reminder of how completely she had been accepted into their community. Their carefree behavior was perhaps the best evidence of the security that had been restored to their lives. Ahmed approached with his usual morning tea, a ritual that had continued even after the wall's completion. Through their mixture of broken English, hand gestures, and shared smiles, he conveyed his gratitude one final time. He presented Maria with a small tile decorated with traditional patterns, something his granddaughter had made specifically for her. It was a simple gift that carried profound meaning about family, tradition, and the bonds that transcend cultural differences. As Maria prepared to leave Al-Rashid, she realized that her original goal of finding meaning through service had been achieved in ways she could never have anticipated. She had come seeking to rebuild structures damaged by conflict, but had discovered that the most important construction was the building of relationships, trust, and mutual understanding between people from different worlds. The other aid workers gathered to see Maria off, each having been changed by witnessing her transformation from construction volunteer to community defender. Sophie mentioned that Maria's example had inspired her to extend her own mission, while James spoke of incorporating Maria's story into the curriculum he was developing for the school's library. Sergeant Rodriguez arrived just as Maria was loading her bags into the vehicle that would take her to the airport. Their goodbye was brief but meaningful, with mutual acknowledgement of the unique experience they had shared. He reminded her that she would always have a place in the brotherhood of those who had stood together when it mattered most. As the vehicle pulled away from the school compound, Maria took one final look at the wall she had built. It stood solid and permanent, a testament to what could be accomplished when people chose to build rather than destroy, to protect rather than threaten, to stand together rather than apart. The bullet marks had been repaired, but the strength, forged through shared danger, would endure. The road leading away from Al-Rashid passed through the same landscapes where Maria had first arrived months earlier, but everything looked different now. She was returning to Spain as someone fundamentally changed by her experiences, carrying with her not just memories, but a deeper understanding of her own capabilities and the importance of standing up for communities in need. Back in Barcelona, Maria's life resumed its normal rhythms, but she found herself frequently thinking about the wall, the school, and the people she had come to care about in Al-Rashid. She had returned to her engineering career with a new perspective on the importance of building structures that could protect and serve communities, not just fulfill aesthetic or commercial purposes. 6 months after leaving the village, Maria received a package from Hassan containing photographs of the school's first graduation ceremony since the wall's completion. The images showed children receiving their diplomas in front of the barrier she had built, their faces bright with hope for the future. Ahmed was visible in the background, his smile conveying pride in both the graduates and the wall that had helped make their education possible. Among the photographs was a letter from Sergeant Rodriguez, now stationed elsewhere but still in touch with contacts in the region. He reported that the area around Al-Rashid remained peaceful, with no further militant activity detected. The success of the defense had apparently convinced hostile groups that the community was too well protected and determined to be a viable target. Maria framed one of the graduation photographs and placed it on her desk at work, a daily reminder of what had been accomplished through the combination of construction skills, community cooperation, and the willingness to stand together when danger threatened. The image inspired her continuing efforts to find projects that would make meaningful differences in people's lives. The experience in Al-Rashid had given Maria a new understanding of the relationship between building and protecting, between construction and defense, between individual skills and community needs. She had learned that sometimes the most important walls are not just physical barriers, but the bonds of trust and mutual support that connect people across cultural and national boundaries. Years later, Maria would still occasionally wake from dreams about that night when Sergeant Rodriguez had placed a weapon in her hands and stepped aside, trusting her to help protect everything they both cared about. The memory remained vivid, not because of the violence but because of what it represented, about the capacity of ordinary people to rise to extraordinary circumstances when the stakes demanded nothing less than their very best.